In the wilds of Canada, at the extreme northern end of the province of Quebec, there is a natural wonder. It was once known by a name given to it by the Inuit people, which roughly translates as the crystal eye. The feature is a kind of lake, but it has the most unusual properties. It's called the Pingualuit Crater nowadays, and scientists still can't quite wrap their heads around some of its mysteries. Massive Arctic crater has a strange feature that's been confusing people for decades. The strange and mystifying Pingualuit Crater lies in the Nunavik region of Quebec, a region quite possibly unfamiliar to many people around the world. Nunavik is absolutely huge, though, and it encompasses about a third of Quebec itself. For a sense of scale, we can say it's a bigger area than the whole of California. Nunavik has tended to remain under most people's radar, but it has had its brushes with fame. And that's largely because of the Pingualuit Crater, which actually started making headlines in 1950. Pictures of this weird feature were widely shared at that time, and it came to be considered as the eighth wonder of the world. It's clear to see why. The Pingualuit Crater is situated in a beautiful tundra region, surrounded on all sides by a vast range of spectacular natural formations. Yet it is the crater itself that stands out most, unusual as it is. It just looks so otherworldly that it really captures the imagination. The name of this feature has evolved a lot over the years. In addition to the Inuit term meaning crystal eye, it has also been called Chub Crater and New Quebec Crater at various points. It was only in 1999 that the Pingualuit Crater moniker was settled upon, a word meaning where the earth rises. The diameter of the crater stretches to just over 2 miles, while its circumference is about 6 miles. It's a pretty big feature, in other words, which may go some way to explaining its appeal. But on top of that, it's also the perfect shape of a circle, which makes it stand out so much against the roughness of the wider terrain. The circumference of the crater is a tall mound which at its tallest points stands roughly 520 feet above the ground surrounding it on all sides. This is actually the highest spot in the entire region. But what could have caused such a slope to form and in such a perfectly round shape? Well, a meteorite smashing into the surface of the earth would do it. The slopes surrounding the Pingualuit Crater are thought to have once been taller, but they've since been worn down by erosion. Scientists believe the crater has been here for so long that it's experienced not one, but 2 ice ages. The processes involved in such geological eras have meant that pieces of the meteorite that once were a part of the slope have been drawn away. Taken as a whole, the crater can have a mesmerizing effect on people. Take Pierre Filey, a cultural geographer from France who lives in a community not far from Pingualuit. He visited the area about 4 decades ago for work, and he was totally taken by it. He met a woman, settled down, and hasn't looked back. Filey knows a lot about the crater and its modern history, some of which he recounted to the BBC in April 2022. He explained that the feature started to drum up interest after American Air Force officers noticed it from the air in 1943. He said it was first known to anyone from the Western world that year, during World War II, when fighter pilots spotted it and used it as a navigational aid. But they didn't share it with the rest of the world until the war was over. It must be stressed, however, that these American pilots weren't the first people to discover the crater. Inuit people were aware of the feature for a long time, well in advance of any Western people developing an interest in it. But in terms of gaining widespread recognition, the Pingualuit Crater really became known after the pilots had snapped photos of it. This new fame started to draw people to the crater, including one Fred W. Chubb. He took a look at those photographs of the feature and became convinced that it must have formed because of a volcano. A prospector by trade, Chubb felt that meant there would be diamonds there, waiting to be extracted. Chubb arranged an expedition to the crater, bringing along Dr. Victor B. Mean for the journey. Dr. Mean was a geologist, so he made a useful addition to Chubb's team. When they got to their destination, though, they found there were no diamonds there to be recovered. And that got Dr. Mean thinking. It occurred to Dr. Mean that this feature hadn't been formed by a volcano at all. No, he realized a meteorite was far more likely the culprit. More than that, he intuited how old it must be. Because he'd never heard any Inuit lore about an object appearing out of the sky and smashing into the earth, He figured the impact must have occurred before their time in the region. That would mean it had happened no fewer than 3,000 years previously. People weren't initially very receptive to Dr. Mean's ideas. The notion that the crater had been caused by a meteorite impact was met with skepticism, but he always held on to the belief himself. In the end, he would be vindicated by later studies supporting his ideas. It seems clear these days that it really is a crater formed by a meteorite. Where Dr. Mean may have been a little off was in his estimation of how long ago the meteorite smashed into the site. He figured it must have been more than 3,000 years ago, which is certainly true. It's just a gross understatement. This event is now believed to have happened closer to 1.4 million years ago. Dr. Mean can probably be forgiven for this, given how important his ideas have been in general. His theories about the Pingualuit Crater have really shaped our contemporary understanding of this formation and its history. But still, that doesn't mean we know everything. There are still plenty of mysteries surrounding this feature. In terms of the things we can be fairly confident of, Filey told the BBC, the impact happened 1.4 million years ago. Looking at the crater's width and depth, its impact is estimated to have been 8,500 times stronger than the A-bomb dropped on Hiroshima. That's a pretty astonishing idea. Such devastation isn't necessarily apparent nowadays. What can be seen around the crater today are different shards of rock, some of which are black and dotted with holes. This is indicative of the heat and intense pressure that resulted from the meteorite impact, which caused minerals to turn to liquid and bubble up. One reason why the Pingualuit Crater is unique has everything to do with the angle at which the meteorite smashed into the ground. This usually happens at a slant, which would form a different type of crater. But this one appears to have come into being after the meteorite crash landed almost totally vertically. Another thing we can be confident of is how the crater came to be filled with so much water. This happened during the most recent ice age, when the region was covered in ice. As this started to melt, ice remained inside the crater and later melted. The water remains there to this day. The water held within the crater is a marvel in its own right. The lake is incredibly clear and pure, probably more so than any other body of water, except for Japan's Lake Mashu. But how is this so? Well, the lake within the crater is entirely self-contained, with no channels leading in or out of it. Only rainfall can add to its levels. The salt level of the crater's waters is incredibly low. It's but a fraction of what we'd find in the Great Lakes, for instance. If you were to drop an instrument known as a Secchi disc into the water, it would sink around 115 feet before you lost sight of it. That's how you measure the visibility in water. With visibility like that, it should be quite easy to make out the Arctic char swimming around the lake. These fish are a puzzle, as scientists just can't agree on how they got here in the first place. Remember, the lake is self-contained. That means they're isolated, which has had a bearing on their evolution. Their bodies have become thin and their heads large, and there are even reports of the fish resorting to eating each other, given the scarcity of other food sources. One theory about how the char might have got into the lake runs as follows. In the past, when the ice in the region was melting, the lake's levels were higher. That meant it needed to be drained, which would have occurred via a gully. The scars of this channel can be seen today, even though the lake is cut off now. Anyway, it's possible the fish swam up this gully while it was present, eventually becoming stranded in the crater. There's still just so much we need to figure out about the Pingualuit Crater, as Filey pointed out in quite a poetic way to the BBC. The landscape is a living book, as he phrased it. There is so much we can learn if we take the time to read it. Happily, teams of people have been attempting to do just this over recent years. For instance, back in 2007 a group of experts from Quebec's Laval University set out to investigate the site. The team's leader, Professor Reinhard Pionitz, called the crater a scientific time capsule, an apt description if ever there was one. Professor Pionitz and his team bored a deep hole in the ice at the Pingualuit Crater, into which they fed their instruments. With that, they managed to extract sediment, fossils, and a whole range of other telling materials. Analysis of all this stuff will help to build a clearer picture of the processes that occurred in this area long ago. Understanding how climate change works is a vital task of contemporary scientists, and work like Professor Pingualuit's can prove to be very insightful in this regard. The Pingualuit Crater has been present on Earth for a long time, after all, having existed through so many different ages. It can tell us so much. On a website called Crater Explorer, Professor Pingualuit himself has been quoted as he reflects on his investigation of the Pingualuit Crater. He said, "These fossils will tell us the story about the past environment. We can learn about the fragility of the climate system and how it responds to external forces. This is far from the only meteor crater to display properties that have baffled science, however." At a remote lake in Maharashtra in western India, a team of scientists were puzzled over a bizarre mystery. During the Paleolithic era, a meteor landed in this part of the Earth, creating a crater that spawned myths and legends for thousands of years. But then, in the summer of 2020, it did something it's never done before. And it was something perhaps even more peculiar than the mysterious properties of the Pingualuit Crater. Located some 300 miles from the Indian city of Mumbai, Lonar Lake takes its name from an evil spirit that once fought with the Hindu god Vishnu. And for centuries, it's been revered as a holy place. But now, it isn't just tourists and religious pilgrims who are making the trek to these distant shores. In June 2020, something strange happened to the waters of Lonar Lake. Previously a murky green in color, they shifted to a startling, unnatural hue. And in an attempt to understand this otherworldly transformation, scientists came up with all sorts of theories before discovering the truth. So, what's really happening at this legendary crater in the midst of the Indian jungle? Located at the heart of what's now the Lonar Wildlife Sanctuary, this ancient crater lies on the Deccan Plateau, which stretches across southern and western India. At around 6,000 feet in length, the lake has a surface area of just under half a square mile. And in places, its waters plunge almost 500 feet. However, perhaps the most intriguing thing about Lonar Lake is the story behind its creation. According to NASA, the body of water was created tens of thousands of years ago. And at first, experts believed that it was volcanic in nature as it's situated on the Deccan Plateau. Then, during the 1970s, all that changed. While conducting studies at Lonar Lake, researchers discovered mescalinite in the area, a type of glass that forms where an impact has taken place. And according to NASA, it would have taken a high-speed collision for such a substance to be created. Armed with this information, experts concluded that Lonar Lake was in fact a crater caused by a meteorite that struck the Earth. And despite its age, it's still considered relatively new in geological terms. In fact, the lake remains the sole example of such a recent collision that scientists have detected anywhere in the world. According to experts, the meteor that created Lonar Lake was likely traveling at more than 50,000 miles per hour when it crashed into the Earth. And as the years passed, thick vegetation began to grow around the vast crater. In the meantime, it also began to fill with water from a nearby stream, eventually creating a calm, green pool. Today, the shores of Lonar Lake are lined with wild trees and shrubs, while farmers grow crops such as papaya, banana, and maize on the nearby slopes. Moreover, various flora and fauna thrive in and around the water itself. Keen ornithologists might spot Brahminy ducks and barn owls, for example, while deer, gazelle, and chinkara live wild in the surrounding forest. Unlike the nearby hotspots of Ellora and Ahanta, Lonar Lake is more of an under-the-radar visitor destination. But those who make the 4-hour trek from the nearest city, Aurangabad, are rewarded with an incredible sight. In addition, over the years, a number of Hindu temples have sprung up in the area, although many of them stand in ruins today. Here, folklore claims that the crater was once the home of an evil spirit named Lanasura, who was the son of a holy seer called Kashyapa. Apparently, the spirit was known for committing malevolent acts, and the Hindu god Vishnu punished Lanasura by banishing him underground. Out of regret, the story goes, Lanasura began to sob, and eventually the crater swelled with his tears. Today, it's believed that this legend may have been born from the fact that the water in Lonar Lake is salty, just like tears. In fact, the name Lanasura, as well as that of the nearby town, Lonar, are taken from Lavan, the term for salt in the local Marathi language. However, there's an alternative story about Lanasura and Vishnu that's associated with the site. In this version, Lanasura and Vishnu fought a vicious battle that ended when the lake was filled with the evil spirit's blood. In recognition of this struggle, a temple was constructed close to the lip of the crater between the 6th and 12th centuries BC, known as Daityasudan. It's named after the incarnation that Vishnu took while vanquishing his foe. Now located in the center of Lonar, Daityasudan is the only one of the lake's temples that hasn't fallen into ruin. Decorated with a collection of lewd carvings, its appearance is reminiscent of the famous temples at Khajuraho in the neighboring Madhya Pradesh region. And even today, it remains a remarkable sight. Closer to Lonar Lake itself there are more temples, each representing a certain Hindu deity or myth. At Shankar Ganesha, for example, an idol of the god Shiva adorns a building that's beginning to disappear beneath the murky waters. Meanwhile, the crumbling Ram Gaya is dedicated to another of Vishnu's avatars, Lord Rama. These days, few of Lonar's 23,000 inhabitants make the journey to worship in ruined temples, such as Kamalja Devi, on the shores of the lake. However, during Navratri, a popular Hindu holiday, the place becomes bustling and vibrant. Some pilgrims also still make their way to Gamak, which marks the spot where the goddess Sita is rumored to have washed herself in the lake's waters. Historically, water has always played an important role in Indic religions such as Hinduism. And as such, it's hardly a shock that sacred buildings are often located in places where this resource is abundant. Nonetheless, the rich history and legends associated with Lonar Lake suggest that this was a particularly significant place. Today, Lonar and the surrounding area are home to a mixture of cultures and religious beliefs, although Hindus still remain in the majority. However, the lake's spiritual significance may not be enough to protect it forever. According to reports, the land is becoming damaged by heavy fertilizer usage, which is contaminating the water. In fact, this part of India has changed drastically over the years, and many of the shifts are leaving Lonar Lake in peril. For example, chemicals are making their way into the water stream, while grazing on deforested land further contributes towards the pollution. Illegal underground works may also be disrupting the source of the lake. At certain times of the year, such as during festivals, large numbers of people flock to Lonar Lake. And, unfortunately, many of them leave litter and other pollutants behind. In other instances, careless visitors disturb the fragile ecosystem that's grown up surrounding the crater. And to top it all off, experts noted in 2017 that the body of water was at risk of drying out. Keen to protect Lonar Lake for future generations, the local community always keep a close eye on developments. And in June 2020, observers noticed something that nobody was expecting. Seemingly overnight, the color of the water had altered from green to a vivid, almost fluorescent pink. Using satellite images from NASA, experts were able to confirm that Lonar Lake had indeed changed color and quickly, too. In a photograph dated May 25, 2020, the water is clearly the same green hue that it's been for years. However, in a snap taken just 16 days later, the difference is clear. Before long, everyone from scientists to concerned observers had taken to social media to discuss the strange happenings at Lonar Lake. On Twitter, for example, Gajanan Karat, a geologist from Maharashtra, explained that the phenomenon had been observed before. However, he pointed out that the 2020 occurrence was far more extreme than in previous instances. But what had caused Lonar Lake to change color in such a dramatic fashion? In an attempt to get to the bottom of the mystery, a team of researchers moved in to begin studying the strange waters. And according to the region's deputy conservator of forests, M.N. Kerner, it looked set to be an exhaustive process. "We are observing the phenomenon to such an extent for the first time," Kerner told the Times of India in June 2020. "We will collect samples of the lake water for testing and to find the reason behind the occurrence. These samples will be sent to Niri, Nagpur, and Agarkar Research Institute, Pune." And while researchers were awaiting the results of the tests, many began to speculate over the source of the vibrant pink color. In a video posted to Twitter on June 11, for example, Carrot proposed a solution. "It's looking particularly red this year because the water's salinity has increased," he said. And he seemed to be onto something with this theory. Certainly, analogous incidents have been observed elsewhere in the world at other bodies of water that have turned a rosy hue. In Lake Urmia in Iran, for instance, experts noted that spells of warm weather have resulted in water levels that are lower than normal. And when this happens, salt deposits concentrate within the remaining liquids. At such times, when Lake Urmia becomes an intensely salty environment, conditions are ripe for organisms known as Denaliella algae. Typically, these are green in color, much like the surface of Lonar Lake in the past. However, in warm and saline conditions, they create a layer of carotenoids. Over in Melbourne in the Australian state of Victoria, scientist Mark Norman has observed a similar phenomenon in the city's Westgate Park. In a 2017 interview with the New York Times, he explained the process. The carotenoid also acts as a filter to protect their chlorophyll, almost like a pair of sunglasses that goes over the chlorophyll cells and aids in photosynthesis, Norman stated. And as well as protecting the algae, this process also has another effect, making the organisms red in color. In Westgate Park, this caused the water to become a shade of pink almost identical to that observed at Lonar Lake. But had the same thing happened there? Dr. Prashant Akafalkar, who is from the Agarkar Research Institute, spoke to the Bombay High Court in 2020. During the investigation of the lake water samples, we found the water turned pink due to the large presence of Halorchia population in the lake, and since Halorchia produces a pink pigment, it formed a pink color mat on the water surface. Thankfully, experts believe that the algae, a type of organism known as halobacteria, doesn't pose a risk to health. Nonetheless, microbiologist Harish Malpani told the Times of India that further study was still needed. Sudden change in color of water is strange, he said. That's why the authorities acted so quickly to find out the cause. Within days of the color change happening, the phenomenon at Lonar Lake had drawn the attention of the local authorities. Already concerned about conditions in the area, the High Court of Bombay issued a series of directives aimed at safeguarding the region from further development. While scientists waited on their results, others put forward some other theories explaining why they thought the lake had turned pink. With much of Maharashtra, along with the rest of India, on lockdown due to coronavirus at the time of the discovery, pollution levels were unusually low. Might this have also played a role in the phenomenon? There wasn't much human activity due to lockdown, which could have accelerated the change, made in Suryaveshi of Maharashtra's Babasaheb Ambedkar University, informed AFP in June 2020. But did the lake go back to its normal color? That's what everyone wants to know? Well, yes seems to be the answer. After delivering the results of his organization's study, Dr. Prashant Akafalkar told the Hindu Times that an increase in rainfall had started to turn the lake back to its usual color. The salinity had decreased and the green algae had returned. However, it appears as if this phenomenon isn't always temporary in nature. In Western Australia, the saline Lake Hillier has been pink since at least 1802, when it was first discovered by Europeans. Again, algae are believed to be responsible for the water's unusual hue. In this case, Lake Hillier maintains a strong concentration of salt all year round, which may explain why the pink color is permanent. And that's far from the only location where colored lakes are an enduring fixture. In fact, there are numerous additional examples in Australia alone, particularly in Victoria's Murray Sunset National Park. Amazingly, the phenomenon has been spotted all over the planet, from Senegal to Bolivia, Azerbaijan and Spain. And in some places, the red pigments have even been harvested for industrial use. However, Norman warned would-be visitors against taking a plunge in these rosy lakes. Apparently the high salt content wouldn't make for a pleasant swim. It's better to look at it than to jump in it, he told the New York Times. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.